with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, November 14th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jean Su, director of the Center for Biological Diversity's Energy Justice Program, will be on with us to talk about activism for the climate under Trump. And later, Sina Toossi will join us, senior fellow at the Center for International Policy, to talk about Trump's war cabinet and his foreign policy. Also on the program, Trump picks widely despised Republican Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, a loyalty test for Senate Republicans. Those same Senate Republicans who just elected John Thune as leader in a secret ballot, in an act of loyalty to McConnell over Trump, who I kind of wanted Rick Scott.
There's only so far you can go.
Oh, yeah. The secret ballot thing helps, right?
Yeah, and him being Bat Boy from the National Enquirer fame.
Right. Trump may, he's like, John Thune, he looks the part.
Central casting.
Yeah. Hours after his nomination, Gaetz resigned from Congress to skirt an ethics investigation that is likely to be leaked in the next 24 hours. This prompted Mike Johnson to beg Trump, stop picking House Republicans for your cabinet. You're cutting into my majority. Casey versus McCormick in Pennsylvania is headed to a recount. Elon is reportedly wearing out his welcome at Mar-a-Lago. Trump insiders describe him as a guest who won't leave. Ouch. Trump will reportedly advance a ceasefire deal in Lebanon as a gift to Trump. Who could have seen that coming? Russia has increased Ukraine drone attacks by 44% since Trump won the election. In France, far-right leader Marine Le Pen faces a 5-year prison sentence for allegedly embezzling EU funds. The NLRB bans captive audience meetings. That's good. A Department of Education investigation finds that Next Benedict's Oklahoma school district violated federal law in their investigation of the non-binary teen's death. Post-election, New York will revive its congestion pricing plan with a reduced toll. And lastly, The Onion has bought Alex Jones's InfoWars at auction, which is the second best outcome to us buying it. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am back. Very grateful for my day off yesterday. I did nothing. It's one of those days when I didn't leave the apartment. I just laid there.
And shared some news articles.
As far as everybody know, if they don't look into like my Twitter timeline, I totally logged off. But at the very least, like I decided to watch a fun show. I burned through Detroiters. People should watch that on Netflix.
Show, yeah.
So good. I almost like it better than I Think You Should Leave because I think their relationship as friends is so adorable.
Well, I Think You Should Leave is like, it's hard to watch in big takes because it's so like kind of funny but bizarre and you get sort of exhausted. Mm-hmm. Whereas, yeah, Detroiters is a bit more plot. Detroiters
was adorable. So if anybody needs to pick me up, that's my recommendation. It's on Netflix. But here we go. We get a constitutional crisis every day under this administration, it seems like, and we're only 9 days since the election. We're in for a long 4 years, folks. Trump is testing the limits of the Constitution right out of the gate by announcing that he has tapped Representative Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. Gaetz was once the subject of a sex trafficking investigation by the department that he has been tapped to lead. Now, hours after this insane announcement was made, Matt Gaetz resigned from the House of Representatives. This was 2 days before the House Ethics Committee report on whether or not Gaetz engaged in sex with a minor was set to be released. This is notable because the Republicans control the House. So they started this investigation into one of their own members, in part because Gaetz had led the charge to oust Kevin McCarthy, who still holds a grudge against Matt Gaetz, and largely the establishment Republicans can't stand him. So that resignation basically kills the ethics report from moving forward in a formal way, although we should look out for it to be leaked soon. It's going to be leaked. It's apparently damning, according to reporters for the Miami Herald. And the committee's rules were basically that you can't publish the findings of a report during the election season. And so that's why it was set to come out tomorrow. And Gaetz resigned ahead of it to head it off. But it's also a bipartisan committee, and there's equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans on it. So apparently just the majority of Republican or majority of members need to agree to make it public. So you just need one Republican on the committee to agree to make it public formally. But it's going to get leaked at some point. This is just really the central tension that we're seeing ahead of Trump taking office, is that which Republicans in the Senate and the House are going to go up against the cult leader, Donald Trump. Trump is trying to do this as a loyalty test, basically, for members of the Senate. Are you going to go along, or are you going to stand in my way? It's easier for them to elect Thune as the House Majority Leader when it's a secret ballot. But when it's public who you're voting for, they're already basically saying, I think Tommy Tuberville will play that later, says, okay, you vote against Trump, we're going to primary you. That's the game that Trump is playing. I think
Elon even said that. Like, he's floating the idea of a PAC to go after anybody.
Yeah, and it's just crazy because, like, I don't even need to say this, but outside of all the ethical issues that Gaetz embodies, he has no experience. He did go to law school, whoop-de-doo. So he's a
political dynasty sort of fail son.
Yeah, he went to law school, and then I just checked, like, he spent 2 years in private practice, and apparently he has been unable to practice law in Florida. I think I wrote it down here. Okay, 3 of the last 5 years, he's been unable to practice law in Florida because he hasn't paid dues or hasn't been in compliance with the laws that you would need to abide by to be a lawyer. So, like, this is not somebody who is active in the legal field. And for him to be attorney general, it's a joke. It's
and
a
I would
troll.
just say, even if he was active in the legal field in Florida, it would be an eyebrow raise from me still then too, because the type of law that I think a person like Matt Gaetz gets into, I think, is probably not real. It's the type of law that, like, say, is practiced by all the Trump lawyers who have been arrested
right.
or charged for crimes.
Right. I mean, it is an outlandish pick, which is why there are people who are guessing that perhaps Gaetz is the sacrificial lamb for Senate Republicans for them to vote against him, but then confirm all of his other bat crap crazy, to borrow from Sam, selections for his cabinet. But we can count on some Senate Republicans to stand up to Donald Trump. Here is Markwayne Mullin on CNN saying exactly how he feels about Matt Gaetz for Attorney General.
You got to think about this guy. This is a guy that the media didn't give a time of day to after he was accused of sleeping with an underage girl. And there's a reason why no one and the conference came and defended him, because we had all seen the videos he was showing on the House floor that all of us had walked away of the girls that he had slept with. He'd brag about how he would crush ED medicine and chase it with an energy drink so he could go all night. This is obviously before you got married. And so when that accusation came out, no one defended him, and then no one on the media would give him a time of the day. All of a sudden, he found fame because he opposed the Speaker of the House back in November, and he's always stayed there. And he was never going to leave until he got this last moment of fame by going after a motion to vacate.
Wow, strong words from Senator Markwayne Mullin. Maybe we can count on him to vote against this obviously outlandish, unqualified, dangerous selection. Thanks for those tough words, Markwayne Mullin. Oh, wait, that was October of last year. Let's see what he thinks, if he still feels that Matt Gaetz' character is that, or at least that it would get in the way of him voting for him on CNN yesterday.
Look, a new haircut.
Are you going to vote for Matt Gaetz?
You know, Matt Gaetz and I, there's no question that we've had our differences. They've been very public about it. I completely trust President Trump's decision-making on this one. But at the same time, he's got to come to Congress and sell himself. There's a lot of, or to the Senate and sell himself. There's a lot of questions that are going to be out there. He's got to answer those questions. And hopefully he's able to answer the questions right. And if he can, then we'll go through the confirmation process.
Senator Markwayne.
So they're crapping their pants right now. This is the kind of thing where I'm not going to shed one tear for these Senate Republicans that have to be put in tough positions because of Donald Trump and everything that he is. You know, the re-election of Trump for a second term is objectively horrifying, and we're going to go through a lot of this country will, and people who are abroad who face the brunt of this country's might, military might. There's going to be a lot of pain and suffering. But the one thing that will be fun is watching Republicans bend over backwards to try to justify everything that Donald Trump does. We saw this during the election. He put J.D. Vance out there in almost impossible situations to clean up everything he said, because Trump gets off on the idea of kicking a dog and seeing if that dog will come back. And he's doing that to the entire Republican Party as we speak.
Yeah, and I just want to point out for any young men who hear what was described in the earlier clip by Markwayne Mullin of people walking away from Matt Gaetz as he shared intimate photos of women he'd slept with. That is, in many states, a crime. It is in every state bad to do. If you don't have, say, the person's consent to share a picture of them with, I don't know, Markwayne Mullin, it is a crime to do so. And it's just crazy that guy is, being tapped for attorney general. It is, revolting. Yeah,
he is not. He is clearly not qualified. The character of Matt Gaetz is besmirched by both Democrats and Republicans. Yeah. And,
look into Venmo, look into expired driver's licenses. This is dark stuff.
It really is. It really is. In just a second, we're going to be speaking to Jean Sue about climate activism under Trump. But first, a word from one of our sponsors, Shopify. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business making, selling, and shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify, including the Majority Report and our merch store. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. It is home to the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%. That means way less carts are getting abandoned and way more sales are going ka-ching. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell whatever your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. I can say this from the experience of being at the Majority Report, where we sell our merch, it makes it very easy for us, and it's not something that we excel at, the business side of things. So Shopify,
Speak for yourself.
yeah, it's not. Well, at least I could speak for Sam, and we know how that has shaken out. But for Shopify, I've used it before to purchase things like Aloe, Allbirds, and Skims, the examples that they give. I'm 3 for 3, and Shopify made it easy, so clearly it worked on me. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Aloe uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/majority, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/majority to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/majority. All right, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be with Jean Sue. We are back, and we are joined now by Jean Sue, director of the Center for Biological Diversity's Energy Justice Program, whose piece in the New Republic is entitled "Trump's Election is a Disaster for the Climate and an Opportunity." Jean, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, rough, obviously, news week and a half at this point. Especially honestly with COP29 and what's the horrible news that came out of COP29. Let's just start there, where we are in combating climate change and what some of the conclusions were out of the conference.
Great. So usually I am at the conference right now, but because I'm very pregnant, so I cannot be there. But my
congratulations.
Thank you. Terrible time for many things. So the conference is still out there. It has one more week to go, but Trump has said that he will be pulling out of the Paris Agreement on day one of his administration. And so we've seen, during Trump era 1.0, he did the same thing. And I think there's a double-edged sword with that type of decision. So, on the one hand, terrible that the U.S., which is the largest oil and gas producer in the world, is pulling out of the Global Collective Action Agreement. And at the same time, the U.S. unfortunately has played a really obstructive role in all climate negotiations, which is why we haven't seen the type of collective action we need. So the potentially one silver lining of Trump pulling out is that we don't have that obstructive force in the collective climate agreements anymore, which means that, really we're looking for global leadership, especially from the EU and other places that have large oil and gas production. And we're looking for them to really step up and get into that leadership vacuum and lead us into a place of true phase out for fossil fuels.
And can you talk a little bit about those limitations from an activist perspective of even the Paris Agreement, or the way that it's been really focused, I think, on the West maintaining economic hegemony while still addressing somewhat along the margins climate change, but not in any real way that would be transformative? Is it your view that it almost was a fig leaf and not necessary for what's the right word? Sufficient. Thank you, Matt. Sufficient to meet the activist needs?
It's totally insufficient, but it is the vehicle that we're working with. So one of the landmark things that happened last year, and so we're on COP29 right now. So after yeah, last year was COP28. It was in Dubai, which is one of our major fossil fuel producers in the world. This year it's in Azerbaijan, and you can smell the gas out there. They put in the smell so that you can smell it, and so it's smothered in gas. Last year we had, for the first time in 28 years, the acknowledgement of countries of fossil fuels. Because the Paris Agreement and all of the words that have been spilled on the page of climate change refused ever to write down the words fossil fuels. So last year we had this incredible breakthrough that the countries recognized it, and then they said, we're going to transition away from fossil fuels. So that was the landmark after 29 years saying something like that. And then they had a loophole that said, natural gas could be a bridge fuel, like we kind of need it, and all these other loopholes inside of it. So to your question, is it sufficient? Absolutely not. From a climate activism perspective, what are those COPs used for? They're really important for global action. And I know that sounds a little bit like a contradiction, but that is the place in the world where you have climate activists. And when I say climate activists, I'm not necessarily talking about organizations that do climate activism, but really people on the ground who are suffering this the most. Friends from Pakistan whose families were completely wiped away by the floods. Friends in Madagascar who have come because they experienced the first climate-induced famine. These are the people who are being burdened the most by the climate crisis that we in the West are disproportionately producing. So these are the moments where really people can rise together and force people to come to the table. One of the most heartbreaking parts about last year is that we, the civil society and the public, were all pressing for actual words that said phase out fossil fuels. That is exactly kind of the language we need, not this watered down transition off of fossil fuels. And the people fighting at the front of that were all the Pacific Island nations. They are the ones whose existence is completely literally and figuratively under threat. They are about to go underwater, and they're the ones pushing for the most aggressive phase out of fossil fuels. And they essentially were completely steamrolled over by the West, by the US, by Saudi Arabia as well. And that's why we got that watered down language. But that is the moment in time where people around the globe can face each other and I hope have some type of consciousness about how destructive the West and oil and gas producing nations are.
Right. And the figures that came out of COP29 in the fact that coal, oil, and gas emissions rose by 0.8% last year is deeply concerning, because the target was supposed to be a 43% drop by 2030, and the target was a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase, and we're going to blow past that. So
we're going to blow past it.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
And I think for people who, a lot of these numbers are thrown around. The Paris Agreement has two numbers in it. One is 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's the first trigger. But then the real one they say that the countries are committed to is 2 degrees Celsius of warming. But why was 1.5 put in there? 1.5 is in there because that's actually the number where we will see African countries completely roast, where we will see Pacific Island nations go underwater. The developed countries and rich countries didn't want to accept that as the target, so they said 2 degrees. But 1.5 is really game over for our poorest countries around the world. So we reached we are on target. I think we breached 1.5 already in terms of the temperature this year. We are not at that right now, but it'll keep fluctuating. But essentially, we are at a point where it is truly devastating for the rest of the world.
And when you say roast, is that essentially meaning likely mass death in these areas, not just due to increased intensity and frequency of natural disasters, but just day to day in the hottest months, temperatures reaching certain thresholds where, especially in nations that are not as wealthy as the United States, you're not going to have mass air conditioning. You're not going to have places where you can go maybe to hide from some of these conditions. Is that what you're referring to?
That's what I'm referring to, and maybe it's too much of a real word to deal with, but it is incredible heat waves wiping sub-Saharan Africa and in other places where temperatures are hot. But Emma, I mean, the fact of the matter is that the U.S. this year actually experienced the same things. Phoenix, I think, reached over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And unfortunately, in the US, it's not about a rich country versus poor country divide anymore. It's about the rich versus the poor. And in the US, we have seen over this past year that communities all over the South do not have access to air conditioning. Communities all over the North as well, because they are traditionally cold, were absolutely unprepared for these heat waves, and people died up there as well because they didn't have air conditioning. So it is the poorest of the poor. We know of family members who died in trailers that were set up by FEMA in the South, because those are crappy steel material that have no insulation, and people roasted to death because they did not have access to insulated areas. And electricity prices are rising up the wazoo because utilities keep charging us fossil fuel gas prices. And so, the U.S. is in a terrible position on heat. We actually submitted a huge petition to FEMA to actually get money for heat. We have under the Biden administration, no federal recourse for extreme heat, even though that is the #1 climate killer in the United States. So the U.S. has to get up to shape. Now that we have this president, it's probably not, game over on that end. But those crises hit poor communities here just as bad as in other places.
And you mentioned Biden. We'll get to Trump in just a second, but where did he leave us domestically in terms of initiatives that the Biden administration passed? Obviously, there was some good pieces of the Inflation Reduction Act that was targeted at reducing emissions. A lot of it has based on the promulgation of electric vehicles, which we know is not is not going to meet the moment fully, obviously. But he also wanted to baby drill in his own way. Biden did to. It runs into conflict with union jobs and supporting that, and the future of the planet, and so it's a mixed bag from Biden, from my perspective. But what's yours in your work?
It's a severely mixed bag. Yes, the Inflation Reduction Act was a historic investment, but at the end of the day, compared to what we put in the military, it was just a drop in the bucket in terms of how much money that was put into it. It's supposed to roll out more wind farms, more solar farms, get manufacturing up for heat pumps. All of those are good things. And at the same time, the Biden administration increased oil and gas production at an unprecedented record, even higher than the Trump administration. So it will end at a point where oil and gas production will be higher than the Trump administration, higher than any administration we've ever had. And what that means on the ground for people is really real. The Permian Basin in New Mexico and Texas is considered one of the largest carbon bombs in the world. And the U.S. American oil and gas companies are fracking the heck out of that. And that means that communities on the ground are sucking in this pollution. They continue to die. Those oil and gas products get shipped or pipelined down to the Gulf Coast, where they are exported out. And at that point, we also have communities who are in Cancer Alley, who will again suffer the consequences of those actions. So we have, the detonation of an incredible carbon bomb under the Biden administration. The Trump administration started it, no doubt, but the Biden administration just kept going, and we have all the communities, all the environmental justice communities, Black communities, and poor communities, Indigenous communities, all in the wake of that, of all of that. I think it's really. My organization and so many others around the country for the last 4 years have been pushing the Biden administration to declare a climate emergency to phase out fossil fuels. And there are so many levers that the Biden administration has to actually phase out fossil fuels, starting from, just stopping permits, just saying no to permits, all the way to stopping the export of LNG, which is still underway right now. But we've just seen intractable resistance from them. It's totally irresponsible, I think, for the U.S. to try to phase out its own use of fossil fuels inside the country while exporting all of that oil and gas to other places around the world and polluting them. So it's I think it is a mixed bag, but it's also incredibly contradictory, and it's not what climate science requires.
I mean, just the idea that he approved the Willow Project is the kind of thing where you can't basically have it both ways. And I feel like it makes it easier for Trump to do what he's going to do going forward. I mean, this is the guy that had Rex Tillerson, an ExxonMobil executive, as his Secretary of State early on in his first term. What do you expect from a Trump administration, and how does activism respond?
On the oil and gas front, we will have totally unfettered drilling. It will continue the Biden legacy on that drilling, but there won't be any consciousness or any movability on any parts of this. Towards the end, the Biden administration did pause LNG exports, but it got battered down by the courts. So at this point, we're going to have totally unfettered, but totally honest oil and gas production and drilling from a climate denying fascist. I think that is the question of what the climate movement does from here is a big question. It's a question that is greater than the climate movement, and one that all of us have to grapple with. For anybody who cares about any types of rights in this country, it's a true fight for our democracy. And one of the things that we saw from this election was people are sick and tired of the status quo. People's eggs prices are going up, absolutely. But I think on the other end, from the left side as well, people are sick of this oil and gas production, and people are tired of their utility bills going up and nobody doing anything about it. I think, one of the hopeful points is that we have a chance in the next, 1 to 2 years before Congress, before we have another congressional election, and another 4 years for that, to actually build something meaningful in terms of a political system on the, and I say left, but really just not Republican, like not Republican and not MAGA system, that of all of these justice-centered concerns, right? And really come together in a super genuine way, stop being siloed, and let's all build something new and put people up in positions who can actually be responsive to what people need.
And how about through the court system? I know that you do some work on that front. Is that an avenue for activism, even in the scenario where Trump has a trifecta?
So it is in the sense of the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court. We're not going to be able to change that. In fact, it will become even, it will solidify its right-wing radical majority because Justices Alito and Thomas will be stepping down, and much younger judges will be coming in by Trump. So the Supreme Court is its own monster, and we can't really change that. But they only take a very small amount of cases that are kind of proffered in front of them for appeal, which means that we have all of the circuit courts and the district courts underneath that to try to make some headway in the courts. Right now, there's around 48 positions still open under the judiciary, and the Biden administration is being pushed very hard. They are pushing very hard for Congress to put in as many judges that they would like into those positions. And I think that will be a saving grace in the next 4 years for, to stop much of Trump's rollbacks. The first term that he of the Trump administration, we had a very high success rate of defending status quo regulations. Our own organization, the Center for Biological Diversity, had a 90% success rate. The overall progressive wing had around a 78% success rate. So, I think that there's still opportunities to defend. But I think that's the point. The point is, we're defending what is here right now, which is the status quo. And that's essentially like the first level of resistance. And we're going to have to use the courts to do that. But what about the offense of getting us to someplace far deeper? And I think that's where the political organizing, the campaigning, the unsiloedness of all of our different rights, that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where we're going to have to be doing serious building.
And lastly, Jean, just the biggest obstacles that you think people should keep in mind when organizing for the climate. I mean, the big one is capitalism in that way, right? Where and it's an economic system that prioritizes endless growth. And then there is this whole subgroup of climate consciousness that is just very capitalist friendly and doesn't necessarily deal with our markets in a way that meets the moment. How can you organize against capitalism under capitalism to save the planet?
That's the golden question. And there are ways. So I love that you put it that way, because I think the Elon Musks in the world and the clean tech bros who have completely supported the IRA are very much market focused. And so they will say the market will take care of it. The subsidies helped for the clean energy, technology to roll out. The subsidies also helped Elon Musk get 100% or 99% of the EV market, even though he refuses to acknowledge that. But those are all market mechanisms, and people are banking, that side of advocacy on climate, just emphasize this, the market will take care of it. As we know, the market does not take care of that. The market is actually incredibly manipulated, and it's not a free market, by the way. So how can we actually organize around that and get out of falling into these red herrings that the clean energy market will take care of it? So state level work is going to be the shining place for actual pieces to move forward. And are everything from combating the Permian Basin drilling, challenging it in state courts, organizing on a mass level to stop site fights and getting state politicians to actually change their minds. Those are possibilities. In terms of renewable energy, one thing that our team works a ton on is the alternative to these large-scale utility clean energy pieces in some ways, by actually promoting alternative systems of community and rooftop solar. And those are actual resilient technologies. Those are ones that folks in Puerto Rico all the way to North Carolina have said, withstand all of our climate disasters, but they're inherently democratic. And they buck the system of the utilities, the fossil utilities that have put us in this quagmire to begin with, who continue to try to beat down these alternative systems in order to pad their bottom lines for fossil fuels. And now they're trying to dominate more utility scale work. If we organize on those levels, at the local levels, that's where we'll see people fighting back against their utilities, because their utility rates keep going up. They want access to clean energy that they have control over. Utilities keep beating that back. That's where we can organize the people and fight that back. And ultimately, there's also just an understanding of their pocketbooks and how all of this fossil energy or continued reliance on utilities keep breaking people's banks. And so, there are aspects of state level work, and it's local, people understand it, that can be access, basically axes of power for us, of uniting people who care about economic suffering, who want jobs in good, clean energy spaces where they can be unionized, and who want to protect their pocketbooks. So these are all opportunities at a state level that we can make happen.
Jean Su, director of the Center for Biological Diversity's Energy Justice Program. You can read her piece in the New Republic, Trump's Election is a Disaster for the Climate and an Opportunity. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, folks, with that, we're going to wrap. Or no, we're not. We're going to go with our second guest, Sina Toossi, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Policy. We'll be right back. We are back, and we are joined now by Sina Toossi, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Policy. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So here we go. Trump, the anti-war guy, just got elected. I say that tongue-in-cheek because we're about to run through, and you have on your Twitter account and through some of your work in the past, even I was just rereading what you had written about Marco Rubio back in 2015 when he was running for president, and it is not comforting. We'll be talking about the Trump appointees that we have on the foreign policy level so far. So let's start there. Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. What can people expect? Because I think he's going to get easily confirmed. He is already a senator. He's been on a top committee member for his career since he got elected, I guess, it was 2010 or 2008. I forget when he first came into the Senate. But let's start there. Marco Rubio for Secretary of State.
Yes. Well, I think I agree with you. He's almost certain to be approved by the Senate. Marco Rubio is really a classic neoconservative. Even his kind of coming into politics was kind of on he got a lot of support from prominent kind of neoconservative donors. From that, he came out of that movement, a neoconservative, meaning, in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, at this movement that was really a big part of the Bush administration that was committed to remaking the Middle East and transforming the Middle East through military force, basically to make it better for Israel. And, they're really kind of infamous for their strong, kind of uncompromising pro-Israel stances. But Marco Rubio, really across the board, he's a war hawk. He's someone who's a staunch advocate of regime change interventions, from Latin America to the Middle East. He is of Cuban heritage, and he came, I believe he and his family fled Cuba during the Batista regime, actually before Castro. But regardless,
they made it so that he heavily implied, and then I think Cruz did the same thing.
And Menendez.
That it was during Castro, and then you look back and, can you explain why that's relevant for folks?
Yes. Well, this was part of the government that was more right-wing and kind of certainly not aligned with socialism or, the Soviet Union or anything like that, the Batista regime that was overthrown by the Castro-led revolution. So, his, and it was also a repressive regime. So, but, this kind of, these people pretend like, they were so their livelihoods or kind of powers in places like Cuba were taken away from them, when in reality, I mean, the obvious picture is different. But regardless, they want power back, and they want power back in these countries. People like I would say that the Iranian American community, which I am of Iranian descent as well, and we can get into that. There's similar things where you have these kind of hawkish diasporas that kind of are trying to push U.S. foreign policy in the direction of regime change in these countries. And, I think in Marco Rubio's worldview, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, these are all going to be in the crosshairs.
And we will get to Iran in particular, because I think that electing Trump and his cabinet increases the likelihood that we enter into war with Iran, which would be disastrous on many levels. But, Rubio's not the only hawk that he has picked for a senior appointment. Mike Waltz has been selected, at least right now, as National Security Advisor. He's a Republican congressman who actually succeeded Ron DeSantis in that district when DeSantis went and ran for governor in Florida. He's a hawk on China, Iran as well. What's your read on Waltz for National Security Advisor?
Yeah, so this just really reinforces Trump's obvious hypocrisy and deceit, where, like you said, he was kind of running as this peace candidate and really fooling Americans into thinking that, he was going to pursue this agenda. And even, most egregious with Waltz is how Trump approached Liz Cheney, which I think rightfully so, criticizing her for being a warmonger, saying that she's not some, warmongers like her, they don't grab a gun and go fight themselves. They want other people to go, fight in their stead and push people into these wars. But, ironically, Mike Waltz was a former senior aide to Dick Cheney, actually. And in the notorious war on terror, he was big Dick Cheney's kind of counterterrorism advisor. He's a huge proponent of the war on terror, even as recent as recent years. In 2018, he was still talking about the need to kind of double down on this war of terror, continue to be in Afghanistan. So he's another product of the Washington foreign policy establishment that has really been responsible for all these forever wars, for all these quagmires that the U.S. has gotten, and that really the people who voted for Trump, many of them voted against this kind of thinking, but Trump nevertheless is appointing people like this to senior positions.
Yeah, and even people who were outside of the formal Dick Cheney orbit, in the way that Waltz was very formally a part of it. You have guys like Pete Hegseth, who Trump has appointed for Secretary of Defense. He is a Fox News host and a Fox News weekend host on Fox and Friends. That's what he's been doing recently. But prior to that, he was also, I believe, a lobbyist for the privatization of the VA via a Koch-funded group. He pushed Trump to pardon the war criminals who gunned down civilians in Iraq. And he's essentially, outside of his military service, that's really the only qualification that he has to be the Secretary of Defense, plus the fact that he worked on behalf of right-wing think tanks prior to his time on Fox News. What does that selection say to you?
Yeah, it seems like Hegseth, much like the rest of these kind of major foreign policy picks of Trump, there's really two criteria. One is total loyalty to Trump, and one is total allegiance to Israel. And this guy, Hegseth, is really a pro-Israel extremist, but in the vein of being a kind of really zealous Christian Zionist. And I think both Hegseth, Mike Huckabee, who's Trump's ambassador to Israel, and Kristi Noem, who's going to be the DHS secretary, these people really come from this kind of constituency of Christian Zionists. And their pro-Israelness comes from a place of, it's kind of really rooted in anti-Semitism, actually, because they believe that there has to be this kind of Jewish states in the Holy Land. And, Hegseth has even said that, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem needs to be kind of destroyed, and we need a third Jewish temple there. And they view this as kind of bringing about the end times or some kind of Armageddon-like scenario that would have, I think, Jesus Christ coming back, the resurrection, and then the Jews would ultimately have to convert to Christianity. So this is really the undergirding kind of belief system in Christian Zionists, but especially, these three people. And Hegseth is, by all accounts, really fanatic. I mean, you mentioned that, he's defended war criminals and all this stuff. Apparently he has, like crusader tattoos. I mean, this guy seems like a religious zealot. And also, like you said, he has no experience in, running any major organization, much less the Department of Defense, which is the biggest bureaucracy in the American government.
3 million employees, I think.
I believe so. Yeah, and like $1 trillion budget, basically. So it's crazy, and he's just another, I think he's just going to be a yes man for Trump, which is probably the most important thing for him.
And the Christian Zionist motivation, you mentioned his selection for ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, father of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the current governor of Arkansas, was in the administration the first time. And Mike Huckabee has said that there's no such thing as settlements. He has referred to the West Bank as Judea and Samaria. And for people that may not fully grasp why this is so dangerous, is that Hegseth and Huckabee having these Christian Zionist viewpoints means that they are motivated to bring about their religious reality in their lifetime, because their belief is that if Israel is a fully Jewish state, that Jesus will return and they will get to see Jesus in their lifetime. It's hard for people, I think, to understand this level of derangement, but it's a widespread belief among Republicans, and specifically these kinds of Republicans.
Yes, I mean, it's really insane. And to think that, we often, we talk about Islamic extremists, or, ISIS was very motivated, for example, by end times belief. Or I remember people back in the day would describe the former hardline Iranian president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad as being kind of messianic and talking about the return of the kind of Shia kind of prophetic figure. So, but now here we have, the world's greatest superpower sitting, having thousands of nuclear weapons, and these kind of people are going to be in charge of Middle East policy. And then meanwhile, in Israel, you have the Netanyahu government, which is now, it's basically, this is the most pro-Israel government in kind of American history. And this is, I don't think Netanyahu could have handpicked a more pro-Israel cabinet in line with his views of what it means to be pro-Israel, which for Netanyahu also includes all his personal interests to kind of maintain power, prevent the, do this kind of judicial reform he's been trying to do to kind of destroy the checks and balances in the Israeli political system. And, annex the West Bank, get attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities. I mean, all the signals coming out of Israel this week is that this is their expectation. I mean, Netanyahu straight up said that, I had 3 calls with Trump in a week since his election. He appointed this new defense minister, Gaetz, who's also like a yes man for Netanyahu, similar to Hegseth. He doesn't have any experience running a military or in the military. But he did say this week, this new Israeli defense minister, that Israel's, has plans to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. And, one of Netanyahu's kind of far-right fascistic advisors, Smotrich, said this week also that they want to annex the West Bank, just openly saying that they're moving towards this. So I think, this cabinet is like, is a wish list for Netanyahu to really advance these incredibly destructive aims.
And it's also reflected in his appointment of U.S. ambassador, the Israeli counterpart in Israel, who is a settler, far-right extremist. That's clearly an indication that he thinks there will be high levels of cooperation with the United States, even with folks that say even the genocidal Biden administration might have found unsavory.
Exactly. This is really, I mean, this guy, the new Israeli ambassador to the U.S., he's someone who I believe was also born in Delaware, I think in the same hometown as Biden. But anyways, this is the most like pro-Israel extremist wing of American and Israeli politics. Even like this guy was part of the JDL, the Jewish Defense League, which even the United States designated as a terrorist organization in the 1980s. They were responsible for bombings and murders. He was close with this Israeli extremist in the 90s who basically carried out a massacre of Palestinian civilians. He was also, he was close with him, he was friends with him, and also was kind of defending him. And now, I think, this guy becoming America, the ambassador, just reflects, again, the Israeli expectations that they're going to try to get everything they want, their maximalist aims. And they're going to, with Trump's extremist cabinet, this new ambassador, they're going to try to really push through all of this stuff.
And so Iran, that's where we get to, I think, even the Israel policy is going to be horrifying. Actually, before we get to Iran, I'm curious from an expert's perspective. There's a lot that I'm terrified about what the future for advocating for Palestine looks like under Donald Trump. But is there, and it will be bloody, and suffering is going to increase even more than it is increasing now. I don't know if, I can't say that definitively, but it's hard to imagine it getting worse, but it can. Just the idea, though, that if the West Bank is formally annexed under Netanyahu, does that change, you think, the global community's response to Israel's barbarity? Because it lays bare the truth of what has always been the case, which is that they live in a one-state reality in the West Bank and in Gaza. That perhaps this alters liberal internationalists' posture, maybe even slightly, to recognize that it needs to be an end to apartheid and one democratic state with Palestinians and Israelis living amongst one another, versus this two-state fiction that liberals from Bernie Sanders to Kamala Harris, like in terms of that range, say is the best outcome. We know that that's not a realistic viewpoint. Maybe this is something that shifts that conversation. That's the only silver lining I can glean from this.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The sad reality, the blatant reality is that, the Democrats or people more towards the center of American politics and the foreign policy establishment that has, been critical of Trump. But in reality, at least on the Middle East or in a lot of these kind of major foreign policy goals of the United States, there's really no difference. And maybe, Trump is really just kind of the more barefaced or kind of, the unmasked kind of version of what the Democrats were also, for example, doing on, the specific question of Israel-Palestine or even Iran. I would argue that, the two-state solution has, been totally untenable and kind of just a fantasy for decades now, intentionally because of U.S. policy, ever since Oslo and kind of greenlighting the expansion of settlements and giving Netanyahu everything he wanted. Even under Biden, we saw, trying to expand the Abraham Accords, which were kind of centered on really dooming the Palestinians or kind of destroying them and not giving them any kind of even political horizon for any kind of self-determination, which kind of is arguably, a factor that precipitated the October 7th attacks. And now we see that, Trump is really going to just double down on, so, in terms of annexation, we can say that, Israel has de facto controlled the West Bank. These are people that Israel has ruled over from the river to the sea, all the Palestinians who lived in this land, an apartheid system that they don't have political rights. And now this would be a step towards legalizing this even more, in terms of America will give recognition, Israel, but then, we'll have to see what, there's millions of Palestinians there, obviously. So are they going to try to ethnically cleanse these people, genocide them, push them to Jordan, like the Israeli right wing has wanted to do? In terms of the implications for the world, America's kind of stature in the world, I think, Trump, as we saw in the first term, and this could potentially be another silver lining, is that he was kind of an accelerationist for the world becoming gradually more multipolar, kind of waning U.S. global hegemony, other countries, including Europe, trying to go their own way a little bit. And I think all of these factors are like, as Trump doubles down on uncompromising unilateralism, intervention, especially with Israel and how much Israel has become more of a pariah state in the past year, that this will continue to come at the cost of American influence and, contribute to the shifting global order. But that's not to say that, that it's going to be at great cost, for the Palestinians. And I think, things are going to get significantly worse, most likely, before they may get better in the longer term.
I agree with you completely on that front. And one of the ways that things could get worse is that we could be in open war with Iran. So we arrive at, I think, the scariest scenario for the world, for bloodshed, potentially. One of them, at the very least. Take your pick. But the people that Trump has appointed are Iran hawks. They're also China hawks, but they're Iran hawks and Israel hawks as well. What with the basically killing of the Obama era nuclear agreement and Biden not re-entering it after Trump scrapped it during his first term, what's the prospect of Iran getting a nuclear weapon? What's the prospect of the United States provoking Iran into a conflict? We narrowly avoided that due to Iran's restraint in the first Trump administration again, after he assassinated Soleimani. Your assessment of the future of U.S.-Iran relations under Trump?
Yeah, I think the biggest risk for a major kind of catastrophic war for the United States and for the world in Trump's second term is with Iran, arguably. And like you said, these are avowed Iran hawks, people like Rubio, Waltz, Hegseth. These people have openly said that America should bomb Iran, go to war with Iran. They've been itching for this war for decades. Arguably, the neoconservatives, they wanted to hit Iran after Iraq, after the 9/11 attacks and the war on terror. Trump, though, he says that he wants a deal. He says that he's the peacemaker. So, and you saw this kind of in the first term as well, where he appointed this very hardline cabinet, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, who are not really dissimilar from many of these picks. And while Trump himself continued to claim that he wanted a deal, but what he did was renege on the Iran nuclear deal and post this maximum pressure campaign on Iran of economic sanctions and covert warfare that was really designed to stoke unrest, instability, topple the government, create chaos inside Iran. And then, and then even though he wanted a deal, he didn't have a team that could facilitate an agreement. When he had Bolton, when he had Pompeo, these people were actually obstructing his own, even the meetings that Trump tried to get. Bolton actually in his book talked about how Trump almost met with the Iranians twice, and he and Pompeo had a resignation pact to resign if he dared to engage in diplomacy. So this time around, there is this question of, Trump's potential negotiating style would be to threaten fire and fury and have all these kind of warmongering hawks around him to create this kind of, madman doctrine, like unpredictability. He could go to war, but then he ultimately might want a deal. But, I don't know if I buy this. And, in his first term, what ultimately happened was no negotiations. We went to the brink of war with Iran multiple times, including after the U.S. assassinated Iran's most senior general. And this time around, this team is not conducive to diplomacy, to say the least, even if Trump ultimately thinks that this can get him a deal in his kind of real estate oriented mind. Maybe, international politics doesn't work like that. Negotiations are an arduous process. You have to have a team. You have to, really be committed to negotiating process. So, yeah, I think for Netanyahu and this extremely pro-Israel candidate, they're going to do everything they can to push Trump towards a war with Iran. And then I think especially as the domestic situation in America might get more unstable, if Trump is really going to start cracking down on his political opponents here, he doesn't have to worry about re-election. He's alluded to wanting to stay in power indefinitely. And a war with Iran could help him potentially to do that, to really, create this kind of crisis scenario. So I think it's very dangerous times ahead.
And before we let you go, China, and I should also say China and Ukraine. I mean, what's your view on how this administration is going to approach China hawkery? The Biden administration was very hawkish with China, whether it be with AUKUS or with this like kind of aggressive economic competitive posture, which they tied in with their foreign policy aims. But I think a lot of people are wondering what's the future of our support for Ukraine under Donald Trump. And there's mixed incentives because there are Republicans in the Senate that really want to keep funding Ukraine, but aren't that vocal about it. And then you have the base for Donald Trump that is very adversarial towards that idea.
Yeah, I think all of these different issue areas are interesting. I mean, in regards to, what Trump might potentially decide to do. I mean, a lot of this team is also ardent Russia hots, contrary to this idea of Trump being kind of the Putin stooge or whatnot. I would argue even in his first term, he was pretty hawkish on Russia as well on many key issues, sending arms to Ukraine. But in this term, I mean, Rubio, neoconservative, has, wanted to basically go to war with everyone. Waltz, actually, interestingly, has even argued for sending, longer range weapons to Ukraine to really escalate this conflict. So, but Trump himself, and a lot of these kind of more non-interventionist Republicans who have sometimes had his ear, I guess, like Tucker Carlson or whatnot, that they have argued, they've said that they want to end this war, or America should stop supporting Ukraine. But I think in the kind of grand strategy of the Trump team, they want to peel Russia away from China. I think that's the ultimate kind of geopolitical vision they have. Like, they view China as more the kind of peer competitor of America that can really challenge America's global hegemony. And so, pushing Russia closer to China, as it's happened in the past 10 years, arguably, that this is something they want to reverse. Now, whether they're going to be successful in doing that is unclear. But I think, China is their really big target. Other than Iran, China is where they think that, the U.S. needs to really focus on. And Waltz and Rubio and these people are all really strong China hawks. But again, this is going to be this contradiction as well with Trump's kind of aversion to alliances or kind of supporting Taiwan, or his kind of saying that these countries should do more to defend themselves. And also, his whole kind of tariff and protectionist regime that he wants to impose on the world will probably, despite his eagerness to kind of contain China, this is probably going to split up the world more into different supply chains. Probably Europe will actually be opposed to a lot of these actions. So I think, again, this is going to accelerate a changing global order, a more multipolar world order, but probably with a lot of chaos until we get to this kind of new global order that's going to be, the first change since the end of the World War II era that's been marked by, U.S. global dominance. But these are, I think, we're heading towards this very disruptive period, and Trump is going to maximize that disruption.
Well, only good news we give you here on the Majority Report, but I really appreciate your analysis. Sina Toossi, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Policy. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
With that, we're going to wrap up the free part of this show and head into the fun half, where we will take your calls, read your IMs, and we will be joined by one Brandon Sutton and one Matt Binder. But first, this show relies on your support. It's going to be a long 4 years, and who knows what the future really holds. But I think independent media, it's becoming quite clear that our traditional corporate press is doing a very bad job of resisting Trump. In fact, they are normalizing him and have been doing so over the past 10 years that he's been in our political consciousness. 9, but nearly 10, and will be more than a decade that Donald Trump will have been either running for president or president. So to support us, you can go to jointhemajority.report.com. You can become a member and IM the show. Would really appreciate it. It helps just keep us resilient. It helps us fend
Not
off.
have to rely on, let's say if somebody goes after our advertisers
Right.
because we're supposedly anti-Semitic or something like that. Yeah, it's nice to not have to rely on, this sort of stuff.
So if you love to listen to this show, it's, the price of a cup of coffee and a half, maybe a large coffee for one tier of membership a month. But if you can't make it work, you can always email us at majorityreporters@gmail.com, and we will make something work for you if you are unable to pay for membership. So we'll always make room for you, even if you're not able to pay at this current moment. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Oh yeah, we had Jeff Shirky on to talk about the abandonment of the working class, what Biden did that has people arguing that he did in fact deliver for the working class, and also what to expect in terms of state repression of the labor movement. That we look back at the last century, and I think lament the lack of union density compared to 50 years ago, and the shame about that time period is it was defanged and neutered by collaboration with the Central Intelligence Agency for Cold War imperatives, and Jeff Shirky's book outlined that. So I asked him what we can expect going forward, say under a Trump administration, where our Congress has given the government the ability to go after people because of supposed anti-Semitism, including criticizing Israel. So patreon.com/leftreckoning.
And on ESPN today, Bradley and I will be giving our picks against the spread. We're going to go live a little earlier than 4 because I got to run. But check us out today after this show, youtube.com/ESPN show. And we have Brandon soon.
You do.
There
you
he
have
is.
me now. I'm right here.
Hello.
I've done it. Hello.
You have entered into the stream. So welcome, Brandon. What is happening on the discourse?
Well, we have a new episode, or rather, I should say, I'm in the process of literally exporting it right now. Our post-mortem for the 2024 election that is going to go up on the SoundCloud and the Patreon. Also, I've been doing, you'll be proud of me. And by you, I mean everyone will be proud of me. I've been streaming Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays on Twitch from around 9 to when the Majority Report ostensibly starts. And I just finished creating a new YouTube account because I know a lot of people have been saying, Brandon, how do I get more of you? And especially since I don't have Twitch, I'm still in the POV of the other person right now. And so I created a new YouTube account. It's The Discourse. You'll be able to watch me stream there as well. If that's more to your preference, I guess I can drop the link somewhere. It'll be on my Twitter. I got confused by the name change again. It'll be on my Twitter. I can also drop it in
my X.
My X, the
Twitter
everything
forever.
app. I'll drop it also in, I guess, the YouTube chat for all of the YouTube holics watching right now.
Are you on Blue Sky?
I am on Blue Sky, but I've had a hard time remembering to cross-post to each one. But I just posted a meme to my Twitter account that I think I'm going to post to Blue Sky right now because it's a pretty good one.
I know, I've got to get back on there. Binder was telling me that it's hopping, but it's just hard for me to get out of my habits.
I've gotten to the point where I'm like, is this a better one for Twitter or is this one a better one for Blue Sky? And usually my sort of like bomb throwing ones where I'm just attacking people sort of maliciously and gonna delete after 4 hours. That's for Twitter.
Yeah,
I just feel.
But Blue Sky's the more like actually what Twitter used to be a little bit more. I mean, it was still about attacking people, but it was also more of a discourse, to borrow your show's name.
Yeah. I've always been a very positive figure on the online left. So I don't attack anyone. I just spread truth. But yeah, Blue Sky's fun. And I guess, I mean, call me an optimist. I just don't think this whole like Elon Twitter thing is going to last forever. It just seems like it is because it's been a long time. But eventually he's just going to be forced to sell it to like a bank
It's been 2 years. It
losses.
seems like a long time.
Yeah.
It seems like a long time.
I tend to agree with you, but I've now been burned. I've been burned by my optimism so many goddamn times that I'm just, including in this election, that I'm done with making predictions for now until 2028 or 2026.
Until you get a string of wins.
Yeah, right. Until I'm really feeling myself. Matt Binder, welcome to the show.
Hello. How are you?
You know, we're doing all right. What's happening in your neck of the woods?
Oh, sure. So tonight, youtube.com/Matt Binder, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, Leftist Mafia. Be sure to tune in. It should be a great show. I'm getting over like a cold where I was like sneezing and coughing nonstop, so I didn't get a chance to do my own show this week, because otherwise you just hear me cough into a mic all day. Luckily, I'm doing okay today, so we'll see how long I could go without coughing.
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're feeling better, and we will have some fun. We'll be making fun of, I think, InfoWars and Republicans and all that in the fun half. The number is 646-257-3920. See you there, folks.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry.